Wow. Oh, that's a relief. As she said her grandfather was in the district, I thought, oh no, I hope this is going somewhere good. So that's a relief. Please tell him thank you very much. Well, it is really an honor to be here. And thanks, Nicolette. That was a really great introduction, and your poise and professionalism will stand you in good stead as you are one day a prosecutor. Thank you, Dr. Dworkin, for inviting me here to RIPAC. What a wonderful thought about why you are doing this and how important it is today. I think we all feel the need for that mission right now. Rowan is really such a bright spot. In fact, when I was talking about it earlier, I said, I'm up in North Jersey. I'm in Montclair, right? And the fact that I hear so many good things about Rowan is pretty unusual. The fact that up in North Jersey, I'm hearing about all the great things that are going on this campus tells you that something special is going on here, something innovative is going on here. So congratulations to all of you who have chosen to pursue your studies here. I think you're pretty lucky to have such a great place to do that. Under the leadership of President Hushman, Rowan has climbed in the rankings. In fact, I speak to Rowan graduates and I say, oh, you must be pretty glad because it's a lot better than when you guys went there. And they all are. They're all really excited about all of you who are going to make it and still making it such a stellar university. It's one of the fastest growing public research institutes in the country. Something to be proud of. So to all of you, congratulations on being part of the Rowan family. It's why I love going to college campuses, because places like Rowan play such an important part in our state's success and shaping the future. And I love seeing what that future looks like. And certainly here today, I know it's pretty bright for New Jersey. Before I go any further, I want to introduce myself to some of the new faces in this room outside of my congressional district up north, and share how my journey in public service has shaped my vision for the future of this state and for our country. So as you heard, I'm a Navy veteran, and it's really the experience in the Navy that has defined my life. What some of you may not realize, and what I really didn't realize as a young person, is how much kind of your first job really shapes you and your vision of jobs going forward. And that certainly has been true for me. In the Navy, I came to really appreciate the power of service. It's where I met my husband, and it's where I learned so much about leadership. I knew I wanted to serve from a very young age. My grandfather was a pilot, a B-24 pilot in World War II, and he loved aviation. And so I was dying to follow in his footsteps. And here, this is a little bit of a cautionary tale for all of you who one day want to have children. Be careful what you say, because I had a conversation with my father when I was in about the 5th grade. And I can almost guarantee you with 100% conviction that my father was paying very little attention to this conversation as he was doing something else. And I told him that I wanted to fly. I wanted to be a pilot. And he said, oh, well, that's really expensive. You got to go in the military if you want to do that. And I said, but I want to go to college. He said, yeah, the service academies will train. Yeah, they train people. That's college. And I said, okay, I want to go to the Air Force Academy. And he said, nah, you don't want to do that. He said, that's a new one. You want to go to one of the more prestigious ones. And I learned he was right. I will say. So I said, well, I want to fly. He goes, I think they fly in the Navy. And I said, okay, I'll go there. He goes, I don't know if they take women. And I said, I'll figure that out. And he was like, okay. And then I was off. That was my decision. That was set. So I was incredibly excited about it. And I knew I would figure it out, and I did. I graduated from the Naval Academy in '94, the first class of women eligible for most combat billets. When I went into the Naval Academy wanting to fly, there were op-eds in the newspapers saying that women shouldn't be jet pilots, that women shouldn't be in combat. And yet by the time I graduated, many of those combat restrictions were lifted. In fact, I remember being called in. All of the women in the class were called in to hear that they were changing the policies, and that was going to open up a whole new opportunity for all of us. So I got my wings. I went to serve as a Sea King helicopter pilot and a helicopter aircraft commander. I led missions around the world. And I served for almost 10 years. And I left the Navy, quite frankly, worried about the direction our country was headed. In the aftermath of 9/11, it was hard to speak out against any parts of the global war on terror. Many people felt that after witnessing the fall of the Twin Towers and the horrible beheadings that we saw online, we had to fight by any means necessary because we were fighting a group bent on destroying us, destroying our country because of our ideals of freedom and equality, freedom of religion, equal rights for men and women and people from different backgrounds, our ideals, being able to speak out even against our own government, and to assemble with others that were like-minded. And yet our democratic ideals require more of us. We have to fight in line with our values. Things like torture and rendition, Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib don't make us feared around the world. They make us weak. The very institutions and rules-based order that the United States has been instrumental in crafting looks hollow if we don't uphold our own values and demand our allies do the same. So at that time, I saw our laws and our court system as the way to fight back against some of those injustices and to uphold the Constitution that I had sworn many times to protect. So I attended law school. I worked at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of New Jersey as a federal prosecutor. I began my time, though, at that office, starting the district's first federal prisoner reentry court, and ultimately left the office to start a career in criminal justice reform. That was right around 2016. Maybe many of you in this room know where this is going. Trump was elected, and he worked to systemically attack the things I'd fought my entire life for: our freedoms, our institutions, and our fundamental values as a country. I felt I owed a debt. I owed a debt to this country that, while not perfect, had in fact allowed me and people like me to fight for and obtain access to jobs in the military that weren't open to me my plebe year at the Naval Academy. I felt I owed a debt to the country that had seen my family move from poverty during the Great Depression to the middle class in one generation with my grandfather's good union job. I owed a debt to the country that protected me as I served in places where women were blamed for being attacked if they dressed in a certain way, where young girls didn't have access to education and could be married off to men twice their age. I owed a debt to a country that has continued to fulfill its promise to become a more perfect union. Because you see, I served during Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And yet, even since the time I left the Navy, we've seen people fight for and achieve more rights in the LGBTQ+ community. And so I ran for Congress. Because the path of service I have chosen to repay that debt is what has defined me throughout my career. But despite being a Navy veteran and an assistant U.S. attorney and a working mom of 4 kids, I heard from many people who didn't think I should run for Congress. They told me that women don't win in New Jersey. Yes. And you heard that right. Little did they know. Little did they know, because what it takes to make our democracy work is people from all different viewpoints, people from all different backgrounds. It's what our nation is founded on. It's that we will be represented by those diverse voices and the many backgrounds of the people who serve our country, and that will lead to better, more innovative decisions. Think about it. I was just at an event yesterday with an assemblywoman who spoke of growing up in the projects of Newark and what it meant to her family to see her representing all of us in the New Jersey State Assembly. That made me so proud. Proud that I'm from a state that offers that opportunity. But to ensure we fulfill the promise of our Constitution and our values, we need leadership. And that's something I know a little bit about. Because nowhere is leadership taken more seriously than in the United States military. You know, you can't hire an admiral off the street. So the pool of ensigns that we have today, we have to make sure some cohort of them are ready to become the admirals of tomorrow, decades later. We have to make sure they're imbued with the qualities of leadership so necessary for our forces. Because in our military, we're asking people to do hard things. We're asking people to do dangerous things. So when I graduated, after more leadership courses than I can remember, in my early 20s, the same age as many of you here, I was put in charge of men and women, mostly men, some of whom were twice my age, with twice my experience in the military. Imagine my first morning quarters. I show up fresh out of flight school, standing there before, I must say, in my memory, incredibly skeptical looking people, standing at rows at attention as my chief gave out assignments for the day, who was going to fix the avionics and which helicopter. And then he turned to me at the end of it and he said, "All right, anything you want to say, ma'am?" And I'm standing there, and that's day one. So what do you do? What would all of you do? You could look back at everyone pretty suspiciously, mumble something, think to yourself, I don't really know these people. They look pretty tough. I'm going to go leave this to my chief and hang out in my office and maybe go fly my helicopter. And sure, some people did that. Or you could realize that each and every person there was relying on you to do better. Each and every person wanted to have your back. They wanted to make sure that every time you went up in that helicopter, you weren't troubleshooting your radio, that everything worked like a dream, so you could worry about flying the mission that your country needed you to fly. You could realize that a lot of the people in front of you were going to be deploying to Bahrain or to an aircraft carrier, and they were depending on you to make sure their families were okay when they left. You could realize that even though these men and women were from towns that you'd never heard of, in states that you'd never visited, that you had so much common. You had all signed up to serve your country. You all really wanted your kids to thrive. And even though life was often tough and complicated, you wanted the people you served with to do well. You wanted to make sure they were doing okay, and you'd lend a hand wherever possible. And then you might realize that's why our democracy works. Because even though we're a nation of different races and ethnicities, religions, genders, sexual preferences, and political affiliations, we all strive for so many of the same things. And so here in New Jersey, we don't give up, we don't back down from tough challenges, because we know we have people working to solve them. Our rich diversity is our greatest strength, and our way of life here is a source of pride. So that's why New Jersey is ranked as one of the top states to live in and work in year after year after year. It's why we're one of the happiest states in the country. It's why we have the best public school system in the nation. We have so much going for us, but we can't get complacent and we can't take anything for granted. And that starts with leadership. Leadership that works with people and works for people. It's too often missing today in both Washington and in Trenton. I've seen too many politicians who put themselves first, who think it's okay to stoke division and rage because it's good for them politically, even if it comes at the expense of our country and our democracy. And one thing I've learned is that it's often Democratic governors who are the first line of defense against Trump and MAGA extremism. We've learned that standing up to Trump during the pandemic, and we sure as heck learned it as the far right struck down Roe v. Wade. Because as we see them continue to attack, to chip away at women's rights across the country, we know we need strong leadership. We need leaders of integrity who can tackle these challenges head on and position New Jersey for the future in these uncertain times. In Congress, that's been my North Star. Defending our freedoms, making New Jersey a better and more affordable place to live, to work, and to raise a family. And when I think about the future, I see three key issues. First, we have to defend our freedoms. And right now, with Roe v. Wade overturned, we have to defend reproductive rights. One of the most critical economic decisions any family will make is when and how to start their family. And we have Republican legislators across the nation that are now trying to take those rights away from women. It pains me to think that my daughters may grow up in a world and are growing up in a world with fewer rights than I enjoyed. It's shocking that extremists in Congress are working to pass a national abortion ban, that the Supreme Court this week worked on some cases to overturn and restrict access to mifepristone, which for decades has been a safe, effective, and legal pill to end a pregnancy. Don't worry, they didn't. Good news. And it's hard to understand that members of the Freedom Caucus are trying to restrict access to IVF for veterans. This is sadly what we're up against in 2024. So I've been fighting in Congress to expand reproductive freedom, to codify Roe, to protect access to contraception and mifepristone, and to support women and families throughout their lives. Part of that is tackling the issue of childcare. I'm working with Senator Elizabeth Warren on a bill that would ensure that no family has to pay more than 7% of their income toward childcare. So for those of you who haven't had the difficulty of finding childcare, I will let you know that in over half the states in this nation, infant-based childcare costs more than in-state college tuition. So second, we have to ensure that every child, no matter which zip code they live in, has access to high-quality education, because that's a foundational issue that impacts kids for the rest of their lives. New Jersey has one of the best public school systems in the entire country. We were just bemoaning how many of our students who are so well educated go to other states who take advantage of that education. So congratulations to all of you who are right here. And anytime I meet with CEOs, no matter the industry, I ask them, why New Jersey? What brought you here? What keeps you here? And nearly every single time I get the same answer: the high quality education system and the talented, educated workforce. Something to be proud of. It's something we have to build on. But not every kid in New Jersey has access to that great education. And it's not fair to them. And it certainly hurts our economy when we leave talent on the table. So I also know that students and parents are struggling to bounce back from the pandemic. Study after study has shown the impact of pandemic-related learning loss on our children. So I introduced legislation that would help students bounce back from this learning loss through high-intensity tutoring programs that are evidence-based and proven to work. Our kids should only have to focus on being the best student possible while in the classroom, but increasingly, they also have to deal with the trauma of active shooter drills and lockdowns. Parents like myself worry each day about dropping their kids off at school in the wake of relentless gun violence in our communities. Just this week, 2 teenagers were shot near Westside High School in Newark. This is an outrage, and it's something we all have the power to change. It's why I've always spoken up in favor of assault weapons bans to keep weapons of war off our streets. And I was proud to vote for the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the very first major piece of gun violence prevention legislation to be enacted in decades. It's also why I'm fighting to pass the common sense gun safety laws that New Jersey has already enacted and that have resulted in our state having one of the lowest gun violence rates in the nation. Finally, we need an economy that is resilient and built ready for the future. And man, after hearing about what Rowan is doing, I know I don't need to tell everyone in this room that. When House Democrats were in the majority, I helped write and pass the bipartisan infrastructure law, which delivered crucial funding to get the Gateway Tunnel project across the finish line. It's a North Jersey project, trust me, it's really good. You guys can take my word for it. That's the nation's largest and most important infrastructure project, happening right here in New Jersey. We passed the CHIPS and Science Act to bring semiconductor manufacturing and research and development back to the United States. And we passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the largest investment in green energy and climate resilience in American history. Maybe the MAGA Republicans in Congress don't know this, but climate change is an existential threat to our country and our planet and has to be tackled head on. We know that here in New Jersey, and we can work together to protect our state's future for your generation. House Democrats got a lot done, and now we're starting to see the results. Because of these investments, New Jersey has seen the strongest manufacturing jobs numbers since at least the 1990s. But we can't let our foot off the gas. Right now, as we say in the Navy, it's time to lead, to follow, or to get out of the way. Because our state and our nation is at a crossroads. Looking ahead in New Jersey, that's going to be tough. History tells us we need to defy the odds in the next governor's race. That after 2 terms in power, voters will choose to send a Republican to the governor's mansion in 2025. So we need to defy history, bring people together, and move New Jersey forward. As a mother of 4 kids who deeply loves this state, I'm invested in that cause. To protect our democracy and the freedoms that make New Jersey and our country great, and I hope you are too, because it's going to take all of us. So thanks again for having me tonight, and I'd love to take some questions. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Congresswoman. So we have a bunch of questions that got submitted. They're kind of all over the place. We'll try and run through them. And I first want to just talk about civility in politics, because we had several questions that dealt with the bitter, the hyper-partisanship. And so the question really is this: why has civility, from your perspective, why has civility seemed to disappear from public discourse, and how can we restore it?
That's a great question. And I do think leadership matters, and occasionally bad leadership impacts things. And I think we saw that very, very quickly as Trump was running for president. And I say that because I have friends who are lawyers. And after Trump was elected, especially the women lawyers that I knew would be in depositions. And they said the actions of their colleagues had gotten much coarser, and people had this bravado that was very similar to how Trump would act. So it was really shocking how quickly people started emulating that behavior. I do think that we are also at a time where people sort of stovepipe their information. If you can kind of get your information curated for you online, or even maybe by the news networks you choose to watch. And I think that drives us further and further apart. One of the saddest things that happened in some respects when I first ran in 2018, I was running in a longtime Republican district. I was running sort of in the midterm after Trump, so there was a real breakdown in the civil discourse. And what kind of shocked me and saddened me was how easy it was for me to find issues that everyone from my most progressive town to my most conservative town agreed with. And I say it was sad because that means that it takes intentionality and hard work to drive us apart. And so I really do think that too many people utilize manufactured rage, utilize those divisions in our society to try to help themselves and their own political ambitions, as opposed to really remembering, in many cases, that this isn't a zero-sum game. It's not as if I go down to Washington and if Republicans lose, I win, because we're all Americans and we're all supposed to be running this country. And so I think that driving people together is something that more of us need to focus on.
Let me ask my own follow-up on that, just because it seems our understanding in New Jersey of politics in Washington seems that it's incredibly dysfunctional, that people do see it. A majority of people seem to see it and raise money off of it being a zero-sum game. You lose, our side wins. What, besides the lack of civility, is there anything else that disappoints you about political life in Washington?
Well, I knew you guys in New Jersey were so smart, and that's why you noticed that Washington is so dysfunctional. Wow. No. Yes, there are things that disappoint me. There are a couple inflection points that really, really disappointed me, and probably the worst one was after January 6th. I was on the floor of the House when that happened. I was actually up in the gallery, we call it, which is kind of a balcony over the House floor, because we were all separated because of COVID, so we were spaced. And I watched the Secret Service rush the speaker off the floor, and then they shut the doors and barricaded the doors. pretty soon after, they escorted everyone out off the floor, and we're up in the gallery, and we're still barricaded up in the gallery. And so we finally were able to escape that. And yet, seeing some of the videos after and what a near miss it was, I haven't watched them closely, but I do have colleagues that have watched very carefully and have charted out where we were at a certain time and what a near miss it was with the protesters. And I really thought in the aftermath of an attack like that, an attack that many of us who've served around the world, and it just looked like other places. It looked like democracy falling in other nations, never ours. And to see that attack on our Capitol, I thought for sure that would be it. That we would all come together to realize what was at stake and what needed to be done. And to have Republican members, when we came back into session, I don't remember what time it was about midnight that night, and I had gotten my second COVID shot that morning and was not feeling very well, but we were back in session in the middle of the night, and we're desperately trying to certify the elections for our democracy. And to have Republicans come back and continue to refuse to certify our election when our democracy was on its knees, that was a disappointment. That was a real disappointment.
I want to shift. We had a bunch of questions about the economy. America seems to be facing a significant disconnect when it comes to the economy. On one hand, at least on paper, things are getting better. New jobs are being created, inflation is falling. And on the other hand, the public doesn't seem to believe it. And polls consistently show that voters are frustrated and even angry with the state of the economy. From your perspective, what is the state of our national economy, and why would you say there seems to be this disconnect between the numbers and public opinion?
Of course, we're always looking at that because we've seen, tremendous decrease in gas prices. We're up at some of the largest numbers of fuel production that we've seen. And we've worked incredibly hard to drive those down. We've seen, the number one complaint I get from my businesses is we don't have enough people to employ. We've seen just great job opportunities. The community college up my way, and I'm sure, after speaking to you guys are experiencing a lot of this down here as well, has put together different programs, certificate programs. And I remember saying to Dr. Iacono, I said, okay, so, you had all these people go through this certificate program. How many people were you able to employ after it? And he goes, 100, everyone. I mean, we are just, trying to meet the needs of our economy. So to hear that sense that everything's wrong, it's hard to suss out. I think there's a lot going on. I think a lot of it is how people get their news. I think a lot of it is what they're hearing. I think there's, the former president, Trump, who's now running again, does not want things to work. He took down the border bill that we had negotiated for months because he didn't want the border fixed because it wasn't good for his election. So, there is an intentional, I think, hostility to good news in some quarters. But I also think that this is a time of seismic change, not just politically, but economically. What we are seeing and what we think the future is going to look like is moving incredibly rapidly. I had one group say that they had come together to look at AI and to do an AI presentation and say, we think we might start to see this type of thing in 2 to 3 years. And he was telling me, I saw it 6 months later. Things are moving so rapidly. It's exciting. There's a lot of opportunity there. There's a lot of opportunity for innovation, but it's disconcerting. It's hard to envision what the world is going to look like in 10 years even. And I think that really makes people very uneasy about the future. So even if the economy is going well today, even if people feel like they have a great job today, I do think there is this sense of unease about where we are headed in the future.
The big issue of the moment in New Jersey politics is about the line. And new as you are to the world of electoral politics, you've run on the line, you've secured it. There were others who might have wanted this congressional seat to be the Democratic nominee. so that everybody understands, the line is the grouping of candidates who've been endorsed by the county party organization on the ballot in a primary election, so that all the names are listed in one column. And there are those who believe that this delivers an unfair advantage in the primary election. For them, the line is unconstitutional because the 14th Amendment says we should all be treated equally. Others argue that the freedom of association, a right protected by the First Amendment, allows these internal party elections, effectively they are their own associations, to take place using the rules determined by the parties themselves. Congresswoman, you're a lawyer, you're a politician, you're a party leader. What's your view on the line?
Sure. Well, I will tell you that this is not just a discussion in New Jersey. I generally, when I'm going off the floor of the House, there's all these reporters, and I often sort of go out a side door to just avoid everybody. And they are grabbing me left and right nowadays to ask me what's going on about the line. And this isn't like, our New Jersey reporters. This is like a nationwide issue. Everyone wants to know about New Jersey politics. So it has been.
I have an opportunity. Okay,
yeah, it has been. Yeah, very fascinating for everyone, really. But when you put out H.R. 1, that is the first piece of legislation that a Congress puts out. And when you have a new Congress that comes out, as happened when I was coming in 2018, we had flipped the majority. So H.R. 1 is a sort of vision of one of your clearest priorities that you're going to have in the House. And H.R. 1, when I came into Congress in 2018, was really about election transparency. It was about voting rights. It was about ensuring people had the ability to vote. And we've seen over time the Supreme Court sort of dismantling some of our voting rights legislation. And this was really work that we were doing to attempt in the legislative branch to assert some of our vision of how the vote should be protected. But this has been a key issue. And fast forward to the last presidential election, when we had the President Trump telling the big lie and putting out misinformation after misinformation after misinformation, calling secretaries of state to find him votes, but acting in a way that was really contrary to our democracy and attempting to really sow doubt in our democracy and our democratic processes. So when I started hearing from my constituents that they felt like their vote wasn't being registered, that their voice wasn't being heard, this was really, really important to me. Because we are in sort of perilous times for our democracy. And so it's incredibly important to me that people in my district and the state feel as if their voices are being heard and that their vote matters. That's why I came out for what we call block voting, which is how I think every other state votes, but it's different from our line voting. We'll see how the court case comes out. I'm not sure now that there is, we're trying to understand if there is the urgency right now. And I know the legislative branch has discussed talking about what the ballot is going to look like. But I think it's everyone I've spoken to seems to be in agreement that we really have to take pains to address the concerns of our constituents in New Jersey.
I want to stick with elections. As of now, it looks like we're heading towards a Biden versus Trump rematch, something that is far from inspiring to a lot of Americans right now. You obviously have your own election to worry about this November, but perhaps you can offer some insight into how you see the presidential race playing out.
Yeah, so I think it's, there are those elections that feel incredibly empowering. So 2018 felt fantastic. It was the first time we could come out and really register how furious we were with the way that Trump was attacking so many of our values. And it was wonderful, right? We had 15,000 person marches in my district for gun safety and for choice. And we were all coming together to really do this in an incredibly powerful way. In fact, my district, the 11th district of New Jersey, had the biggest swing from red to blue, the biggest vote change in the entire country. I mean, we were really amped up and excited, and it was wonderful. I think we brought an incredible amount of new people into the party who still now remain very engaged. So it was really a seismic change, which I love. But then there are elections like this, where you sort of sit here and you think, how is it that so many people in this country feel so differently from me about this election? I have kind of glibly said, I feel like having Trump as president must be like childbirth, because nobody seems to remember how awful it is and they want to do it again. I don't understand that at all. But this is where we show our mettle. This is where all of you who care about our political system show your mettle. Because it's easy to get involved in the fun times, right? When some, neat rock and roll Hall of Famer comes out to give a concert for democracy, it's not hard to go out, right, to check that out. It's hard in these types of elections where people are unhappy. It's hard sometimes to talk to your neighbors when you're unhappy about certain things, but to remind people how critically important this is. And so I'm all in. I said, I called Biden's team and I said, look, whatever you want, I'm all in. And they said, can you be in Grand Rapids this weekend? And I said, okay. I said, I have 4 kids and it's Easter weekend. So no, but here's some dates, right? So I'm really focused on how we make sure that Biden remains president. I'll tell you when I sat there in the State of the Union. I don't know how many of you watched the State of the Union, but I was sitting there and President Biden was enunciating his thoughts on our country and who we are as a people. And it just mirrored my own vision so much. The thought of how we as Americans are, it's just a special thing, and how we united can do so much, and how we can come together. And it stood in stark contrast to every single thing I have ever heard out of Trump's mouth. So I think it's critically important, and I encourage everyone to get engaged and get involved.
Once 2024 is done, we're going to be electing a governor in New Jersey. Phil Murphy's term limited. It'll be a wide open race. Your name has been tossed out into the ether as a possible candidate. So, just between us, is there anything you'd like to announce while you're here about your political electoral future?
I am really excited to announce my run for Congress for 2024 for the 11th District of New Jersey. And then we will go beyond that once we get through that. It is really critically important that we flip the House of Representatives. I'm sure none of you have noticed, but things aren't going very well. It has been really difficult to move forward. There is a group of people right now in the House of Representatives who don't want our democracy to work. They want, I think, to show that democracy's too chaotic. There are too many people involved. It can't function. I think they want some sort of strongman to come in to lead us all. It's a classic autocratic play, right? We have to make sure our democracy continues to function. We have to make sure we continue to move forward with the values that we all believe in. And so this is going to be an important election year. Not only do we have to get Biden reelected, but we have to flip the House of Representatives. I mean, if you do nothing else for your country, help me flip the House of Representatives. It'll make a huge difference.
I want to shift to some issues that came up. Pollsters keep telling us that the plan to develop offshore wind as a renewable energy source here in New Jersey, which at one time enjoyed some wide, broad, bipartisan support, has now devolved into a bitter partisan battle. Any alternative energy future involving wind is going to require an active federal role in terms of lease approvals and possible subsidies to help with the transition. What's your perspective on offshore wind, and how can Washington encourage its development, or would you be with those who would say we need a moratorium to study the issue first?
So we've studied this issue. In fact, thanks to I think your congressman down here, Jeff Andrew, we've had to become marine biologists on my team to suss out some of what he's been promoting. I will tell you, the whales that he says are being harmed by this don't have echolocation. Why do I know that? I shouldn't have to know that, but I know it, right? So when we talk about this, I think we really are looking at some great jobs. There may be some real concerns about fisheries. We have to address those. But to have somebody who has this opportunity for such great jobs down here to put out, misinformation, and believe me, he's on the House floor doing it routinely, really is a shame. And we are very soon going to have a lot of great experiential evidence because they're putting in wind farms up in New York. We are going to lose opportunities if we don't also move into this space, not just in wind power, but also with some of our refineries down here who want to move into hydrogen, which is dependent on our offshore wind industry. This is going to be a green fuel for the future, not just of our shipping, some of the major container ships, but they even think they can do a hydrogen jet fuel, clean burning jet fuel, which is sort of the gold standard of where we get to clean power. So there is tons of great opportunity that will come from investing in wind power here in New Jersey. And I think that it's critically important that we learn the facts, we learn the information. My team now knows all of it. You can welcome to call us so that we can move forward in a way that's really, I think, going to improve the economy here in South Jersey.
We had a couple questions because we have a Senate seat up this year. We had some questions about the indictment of incumbent U.S. Senator Bob Menendez, and a number of indictments that have shocked and disappointed many. Indeed, it's become a national issue with people like U.S. Senator John Fetterman from Pennsylvania going on national TV, calling for him to be, Senator Menendez, to be expelled. Sort of two parts, but I just want to ask this first. What's your perspective on the Menendez situation?
Yeah, I mean, he shouldn't be a sitting senator. He certainly should not be representing us. I think it's pretty deplorable. He hasn't resigned. And I've been really concerned because he has been charged with acting as a foreign agent, meaning giving up secrets. So we have state secrets, and a lot of times the reason we're so protective of them isn't just about national security. It's about the men and women who are gathering those secrets. And so for Senator Menendez to give away to the Egyptian government information about personnel serving at our embassy puts those personnel in danger. So it's really incredibly offensive. And this isn't something, he doesn't serve on the Ag Committee. He serves in Foreign Affairs. He's the chair. He was the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. So he knows exactly what that means. He knows exactly how and why we protect people across the world. And he knows exactly what he was doing when he gave up some of that information. And so not only should he not be serving in the Senate, but I've just put forth a piece of legislation because not only as a sitting senator does he have access to classified information still, we are just about to start a tradition that we've had since about the 1950s to brief. The intelligence community is just about to start briefings with President Trump. President Trump mishandled classified information long before he brought it down to Mar-a-Lago. He was meeting with the Russians, telling them Israeli secrets. He was meeting with President Duterte of the Philippines, telling him secrets that we knew, he would pass on to the Chinese. I mean, he has mishandled classified information left, right, and center. So to have him now being briefed on this information because he's a potential, because he's likely the nominee, I don't think there's any reason to start that until we have to, and certainly not right now. So if you're under indictment for a number of crimes, with my legislation, you wouldn't have access to that classified material.
I just want to have a follow-up on this because we've had a number in New Jersey, a number of high-profile political corruption cases over the years, and at least by reputation, New Jersey politics doesn't always shine. How do you respond when someone asks you, how corrupt is New Jersey politics? What do you say when someone asks you that kind of question?
It's tough. I served at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Newark, and we have the largest public corruption group in the nation. So certainly we have huge problems with corruption in this state. And sadly, when you come out of certain systems, it almost seems as if you were trained in these types of corruption. So with Senator Menendez coming out of a system where he seems to have sort of seen some of the tit for tat, the self-dealing that he engaged in as just appropriate for his office. It was pretty shocking after he was indicted the first time and the jury was hung to see that, I believe that was in about November, if I remember correctly. By February, he was out on a congressional junket, which, I remember that because I had just gotten into Congress and I was sitting in a caucus meeting and somebody said, oh, we just had this great congressional delegation meeting down to Puerto Rico. It was wonderful. We had the largest group ever go. It was really an amazing trip. And right after he stopped talking, both Democrats, this other gentleman goes, all you freshman members of Congress, listen to me. This is ridiculous. Never go on a trip like that in February, in Puerto Rico, on the beach. This is why your constituents don't trust you. And I remember thinking, gosh, it's really shocking to see my senator there right after he was just indicted. So, or just had the trial. So I think if you are going to serve the public, you really have to worry about impropriety. As we always said in the Navy, you have to worry about the appearance of impropriety because you are in a position of public trust. And so people have to trust you. And if that is not something you want, if you don't want to serve with integrity, if you want to do other things, don't run for elected office. Don't take an oath to the Constitution of the United States or the state of New Jersey. Do something else, please, because we really do need to develop trust in our elected officials. That is the bad news. I will say part of it is, too, New Jersey has a lot of politics, right? We have mayors, we have council people, we have county commissioners. I had, one of the districts with the most municipalities in the nation, and every municipality has a mayor and the council and the commissioners, and so we have a very densely political state. That's actually something that I regard as a real gift here in New Jersey because we have a lot of involvement. We have a lot of opportunities. If some of you are sitting there right now thinking, I really love public service, there are many ways for you to get involved at different levels, whether it's running for office or starting off by helping someone's campaign as they're running for office. There's just so many different ways. So while I do think we have a problem, I would also say that part of it is because we do have many great elected leaders who serve so well. And I encourage all of you to look into seeing if that is something you might be interested in.
We always get somebody who's always submitting this question. Why are you a Democrat?
I get that question a lot. I actually used to get that question because I served in the Navy, and when I served, just about everyone I knew was a Republican. And so, I had this background, and people would come to me and say, if you ever want to switch sides, you should come run as a Republican. And I was always like, no, thank you. But I'm a Democrat at kind of my core because I truly believe that government, run well and run efficiently, can change people's lives. And I think that is at its core what being a Democrat is. I think Republicans often think the less government, the better. Get it out of the way, and there will be this nirvana. Oddly, many of the red states live under quite a bit of our federal funding in our government. But I really do believe that government can make people's lives better.
In your district, there are many people who rely on mass transit and are concerned about continued funding for mass transit.
I had to bring up the north-south divide. Okay.
In this area, many of us joke that we wish we had some mass transit to fund, to complain about, to anything. What are your thoughts about how to increase mass transit options in this region of the state? Is there a way for Congress to help with that?
So we passed a huge infrastructure bill, and one of my favorite things to do is to drive federal money back into New Jersey, because then nobody here has to pay, raise their taxes. We already pay enough taxes. The federal government, so driving it back into New Jersey is something I love to do, and I use different mechanisms to do that, and I encourage people in my district, and some come from outside my district, to really look at all the programs, and we will research whatever you want to try to help you apply for grants and get that federal funding back here. And I think there are many opportunities right now, and those opportunities are so good for New Jersey. So many of you know, and I know all the Rowan students know, that there is just an inordinate amount of power in the Western states, right? It's the Electoral College. It's the fact that every state gets 2 senators, no matter how much your population is. Their votes just count more. And so it drives you crazy as a person serving in the legislature, because you have Superstorm Sandy and you have flooding, and that's because you didn't run your state well. You have an ice storm in Texas, and because you literally do not invest in any of your electrical infrastructure, it all crashes, but that is an act of God, right? All the funding, they even had tax abatements. We said, well, give us the tax abatements, make it retroactive for Sandy, and they're like, no, thanks. So that is really a difficult way to maneuver to get funding back to our state. However, when we do some of these broad federal funding programs, as we set up during COVID, as you've seen with the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill and the CHIPS and Science Act, that's where a state like New Jersey can shine with some of these formula grants and some of the means that we have with our technology sector to really apply for them. So yes, I think there are some great opportunities, and we'd love to develop more. I think that I think you're working on the Camden-Gloucester rail that would stop right here and could really open up opportunities here. So I'd love to explore possibilities there.
Thank you for that. One of the ways in which the Biden administration has been trying to reduce the burden of higher education costs, and this came up, and we're obviously in a college campus, one of the ways the Biden administration has been trying to do it is by eliminating student debt held by the federal government. And this has proven quite controversial, has sparked major litigation. It affects nearly 400,000 college students in New Jersey. From the federal government perspective, is this the best way to reduce the burdens of paying for college? And are there other ideas that we should be investing in?
Well, I think at its core, an understanding that we need to figure out this student debt problem is really critical. We have people in their 30s and 40s who are still trying to pay off student debt, who can't afford homes, which are some really ways that our economy moves, right? Home ownership and buying new things for your home. Then we have older people who paid into for their children and have these college debt burdens. That I had one woman tell me she was on a Social Security check and trying to pay off this student debt that she had taken on. So we have a huge issue as to this overburdening of student debt. And I think there are several things. So I think the president did wipe out a lot of debt, which I think that's going to help several people. But my problem with it was short term. It's not a long-term solution. It's not a systemic solution that's going to go forward and handle it. So I think there are several ways we can attack it. You can renegotiate your student debt, which I think is, what you do with your house. It's what you do with your car if rates go down. I think that's an important thing to do. I also think student debt needs to be able to get discharged in bankruptcy. It's crazy that it's one of the few things that even if you go through a bankruptcy, you will still have to pay that student debt. You can't get out from under it there. And then I think we really have to look at how we fund colleges across the country, what students are paying for, and making sure that students have a pathway into great jobs. So for example, you have a lot of for-profit colleges that open up right outside all your military bases because they know all our military members have the GI Bill. And so they bring them into the college, they get them going, they use up all the GI Bill. many times the students have families, have jobs, can't keep up their education. They give all the GI Bill. They don't get an education. There's an opportunity cost there because they were spending time there, and that doesn't help them in any way, shape, or form. So we need to make sure, too, that we have colleges and universities that are really serving students. But I do think that this is something that we have not cracked the code on yet, and we continue to work on, and is just another reason we need to flip the House of Representatives, because we haven't done any work on it with the Republican majority in the House.
We're getting near the end, and I wanted to ask you, especially because we're sitting here in front of a bunch of students and others, given what seems like the endless negativity and unseemly compromises that politics will often require, why should young people look to actually run for political office?
So you should look to run because I think each and every one of you sitting here owes a debt to the country. I think you're lucky. I think you're getting a great education. I think you're going to do great things and have great opportunities. And I think you got to pay that back. And maybe it's running for office, maybe it's volunteering to coach soccer, maybe it's going to a shelter or a food bank. You have to find your own path forward. But I think you owe this country for the opportunities that you've had. And I think you're going to find that as you get older, as you look back on all the gifts that you've been given and how that made a difference in your life. So I think you should consider running to pay back that debt, because we need you. Because we need your talents, we need your innovation, we need your skills, we need a new generation of leadership. And I'll tell you, it's tough. It's tough because if you run for a legislative body, as I did, you have to know what your North Star is, because you're going to be compromising all the time, because that's what our legislative bodies are meant to do. And so you have to make sure that when you're cutting deals, you're not forgetting why you're doing it, and you're not cutting a deal to help your own political future or to make sure that, your friends get wealthy. You're cutting a deal because it's going to get the best result for the people you serve. And it's tough. It's the unseemliness. And sometimes it's really a difficult position. There are times when I sit there and I go, well, if I vote this way, we get this. If I vote this way, we get this. Am I really taking this into account the right way? Am I thinking about the people I'm serving in the correct way? And sometimes votes hurt some people and help other people. And how do you make those decisions? So it's tough. It's tough. But again, we need you. We need you. And I think it would be wonderful to see a great new generation of leadership with people that have that North Star, that can remember that core of faith in our nation and really do better than my generation has done.
We've come to our exit question. We've been talking for just under an hour, but this is our RIPAC traditional exit question. Congresswoman Sherrill, what do you know now that you wish you knew when you were their age, when you were just starting out?
So something I learned is that I think, and I think this is going to be especially important for young people now with all of the different changes in our economy, you have to be open to opportunity. And I say that because of a very particular moment in my career. I was at a big law firm, and I was ready for a change in my career, and I was thinking about what I wanted to do. And one of the veterans groups came to me with a really great opportunity and said, I really think you would be great at this job. Do you want to come work here? And I had a very particular vision in my mind of what I wanted my next job to be and where I wanted to work and how I wanted that to go. And I said, no, thanks. Yeah, I don't want to do that. And then, a couple weeks later, I was thinking about it. That would be a really, really great job. That would be awesome. And I could do this and I could do that. And so I went back to this friend of mine and I said, you know what, Gary, I was just thinking about that job. And he goes, yeah. I go, it sounds like a great job. He goes, it's a great job. And I said, really? I go, are you still looking for something? He goes, oh, no, you filled that right away. And I'm like, darn it, right? And so I'll tell you, when I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office, I wanted to be a federal prosecutor. And they were in a hiring freeze. And so I went to interview because it's a process. And I went to interview with them. And I said, I want to be a prosecutor. I know you're in a hiring freeze, but when you start hiring again, I want to be tracked. I want to be in the track. And they said, yeah, but you know what? We think you'd be great. We are in a hiring freeze, but we can hire a contract worker to do our outreach and reentry work as part of Eric Holder's Smart on Crime work. And would you be interested in that? And to be honest with you, my first thought in the back of my head was, no, I would not be interested in that. I want to be a federal prosecutor, right? And so, but having learned my lesson in the past, I said, that sounds very interesting. Let me get back to you. Remember those words. That sounds right. No. So I went and spoke to a friend of mine about it, and he said, let me ask around, find out what it is. He said, I think this sounds really good, and I think it's going to get you good experience. And I will tell you that experience, that outreach and reentry court that we helped set up, the prisoner reentry court, was actually the most meaningful experience I had at the U.S. Attorney's Office, even though I became a federal prosecutor afterwards. And I really am so thrilled that I took a minute and thought about it and took that job. So that is what I wish I knew. So now you guys all know it. Voila.
On that note, let's thank Congresswoman Mikie Sherrill.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Congresswoman, we have for you, and we ironed it so it's not so wrinkled this time, a wonderful classic RIPAC t-shirt that everybody gets, suitable for wearing. It says Workforce Development for Democracy on the back, which is what we do. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
I really appreciate this. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. We have a number of events coming up in the next couple weeks. We hope to see you again. Everybody have a safe trip home. Thank you.